Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're heading to Germany to explore a political phenomenon that's really got everyone talking.
Mm.
The meteoric rise of the BSW or Bundestag Sahra Wagenknecht. And it's fascinating because this party, it didn't even exist a year ago, and now they're polling high enough to potentially be part of the next governing coalition.
It is remarkable, really is. And it's even more intriguing, I think, when you consider that the party is actually named after its leader, Sahra Wagenknecht.
Yeah.
It really speaks to the level of her influence and her popularity.
Yeah, it's not every day you see a party essentially become like the personal brand of its leader,
Yeah.
especially in a place like Germany with its history of, these coalition governments. So it really begs the question, what is the BSW? What do they stand for? Are they left wing, right wing, or something else entirely?
Well, that's what we're here to unpack. The BSW is a bit of a puzzle. They promote a blend of policies that make it really difficult to place them neatly on that traditional political spectrum.
All right, well, let's start piecing this puzzle together then. Let's talk about Sahra Wagenknecht. Where does she come from, and what might have shaped her political worldview?
Well, her story is really deeply intertwined with Germany's own complex history. She was born and raised in East Germany and actually joined the ruling Socialist Party right before the Berlin Wall came down.
Wow, imagine that, witnessing the collapse of a system that you were a part of firsthand.
Yeah, it must have had a profound impact on her.
It makes me wonder if, seeing that kind of upheaval firsthand might have instilled a certain distrust of rapid change or a sense of nostalgia for a system that, at least in theory, provided some stability and security.
That's a really interesting observation, and it might help explain some of the BSW's core tenets. After the reunification of Germany, Wagenknecht became a very prominent figure in the Left Party, which itself grew out of the East German Socialist Party. But she eventually broke away. She felt that the party had become too focused on identity politics, and that it had lost touch with the concerns of everyday working people.
So she's not afraid to challenge the status quo, even within her own political circles. It seems like that independent streak is part of her appeal. We actually have some firsthand accounts from a journalist who attended one of her rallies. He described her as icy cold, yet charismatic, with a magnetic pull on the audience. He even compared her to figures like Nicola Sturgeon or Boris Johnson.
It's an interesting parallel. All three of them have cultivated this strong personal brand and a reputation for straight talk, even if it ruffles some feathers. And like them, Wagenknecht has a really significant online presence, particularly on YouTube, where she directly engages with her supporters.
Okay, so she's got this powerful persona, this compelling backstory. But what about the substance? Let's dive into the BSW's platform. What are they actually fighting for?
Well, one of their core focuses is economic justice. They advocate for a stronger welfare state with increased pensions, more investment in elderly care, and a wealth tax to fund it all.
So on the economic front, they seem to lean towards that classic social democratic model. But what about their positions on other issues? What's their stance, for example, on foreign policy?
This is where it gets interesting. And where that left-wing conservatism label starts to make more sense. The BSW is very critical of NATO and the EU. They see these institutions as serving the interests of elites and corporations rather than ordinary citizens.
So they seem to be promoting a more nationalist, or at least a Germany-first approach. It almost sounds like they want to roll back the clock on globalization and return to a time when national sovereignty was paramount.
That's one way to interpret it. And it definitely resonates with a segment of the population who feel that Germany has lost something in this era of global interconnectedness. This nostalgia for a perceived better past is a key theme running through their platform.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like they're offering a sense of stability and security in a world that feels increasingly chaotic and unpredictable.
Exactly. And they're not afraid to stake out some controversial positions, for instance. They're vehemently opposed to sending weapons to Ukraine. They argue that it only prolongs the conflict and doesn't address the root causes of the war.
Which puts them at odds with most mainstream parties in Germany, and many other Western nations for that matter.
Absolutely. And they've also taken a very hard line on immigration, calling for stricter border controls and a reduction in the number of asylum seekers entering the country.
Okay, so we're starting to see this mix of policies that seem to pull from both the left and the right. On the one hand, they're advocating for increased social spending and worker protections. But on the other hand, they're promoting a more nationalist, even isolationist foreign policy. This is a fascinating combination, and I imagine it's pretty confusing for voters trying to figure out where they stand.
It is a complex picture, and it's precisely this blend of seemingly contradictory positions that makes the BSW so intriguing and potentially so disruptive.
All right, so we've laid out some of the key pieces of the puzzle, but the big question is, Why is this resonating with voters? What is it about the BSW's message that's attracting such a following? And so quickly, let's explore that in more detail.
Well, to understand the BSW's appeal, we really need to look beyond the surface of their policies and kind of delve into the anxieties and frustrations that are driving their support.
Okay, so what are those underlying factors? Who are the people gravitating towards this party?
Well, they're attracting a pretty diverse group, but there are some common threads that run through it. Many of them are working class people who feel left behind by globalization and technological change. They've seen their jobs disappear or their wages stagnate while the cost of living continues to rise, and they feel ignored by the mainstream parties. Parties that they perceive as being more concerned with the interests of elites or with abstract social issues that don't really affect their daily lives.
So they're looking for someone to speak for them, to address their very real economic concerns.
Exactly. And they're also drawn to the BSW's message of cultural preservation. They see a world where traditional values and ways of life are being eroded by what they perceive as radical social change.
You mentioned earlier that the BSW has particularly strong support in Eastern Germany. Is that connected at all to this sense of cultural anxiety or nostalgia for a lost way of life?
It's definitely a factor. Many people in Eastern Germany experienced a really profound sense of disruption after the fall of the Berlin Wall. They went from a socialist system with guaranteed employment and social benefits to a capitalist system that felt unfamiliar and, for many, less secure.
So for them, the BSW's message of economic justice and cultural preservation might tap into a deeper yearning for stability and a sense of belonging.
Precisely. And Wagenknecht herself, with her East German background, really embodies that experience. It lends a certain authenticity to her message. It's like she's saying, I understand what you're going through. I've lived it too.
That's a powerful connection. It seems like the BSW is tapping into a wellspring of discontent that goes beyond those traditional left-right divides.
That's exactly right. They're appealing to voters who feel alienated from the political establishment, regardless of their ideological leanings. And that's what makes them such a potentially disruptive force in German politics.
Okay, so let's talk about that disruptive potential.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that the BSW is polling high enough to potentially enter parliament.
Mm.
What could that mean for German politics and maybe even for the broader European landscape?
Well, the most immediate impact would be a further fragmentation of the German political landscape. It would make it even more difficult to form stable governing coalitions, which could lead to political gridlock and instability.
So more uncertainty, more difficulty in getting things done. Doesn't sound great.
No, not really. And on a more substantive level, the BSW's presence in parliament could shift the Overton window, the range of acceptable political discourse towards more nationalist and populist positions.
You mean their presence could give more legitimacy to those views, even if they don't gain actual power?
Exactly, and that could have ripple effects beyond Germany. Other populist and nationalist movements in Europe might see the BSW's success as a validation of their own agendas.
So it's not just about what the BSW might do if they gain power, but about the broader trends they represent and the signal they send to other political forces.
Precisely. Their rise is a symptom of deeper societal anxieties and a growing appetite for alternatives to the status quo. And that's something we're seeing not just in Germany, but in many Western democracies.
That's a really important point. It seems like the BSW's emergence is part of a larger global phenomenon, a shift away from traditional political ideologies towards a more fragmented, more populist political landscape. It makes you wonder what the future holds for those established political parties if voters are increasingly looking for something different, something that defies easy categorization.
It's a really crucial question. Can these older parties adapt to this new reality? Can they find ways to address the concerns of those who feel left behind and alienated from the current system? Or will they continue to lose ground to these more agile, more populist movements?
It feels like we're at a turning point, both in Germany and globally. A lot of people are feeling uncertain and disillusioned, and they're looking for answers, looking for someone to represent their interests and anxieties.
Absolutely. And the BSW's success, however fleeting it might prove to be, is a reminder that those anxieties are real and that the demand for change is growing.
So where do we go from here? What does this all mean for people around the world who are watching this unfold? What should they be paying attention to?
Well, I think the most important thing is to be aware of these trends, to understand the forces that are shaping our political landscape, and to be willing to engage in thoughtful, nuanced discussions about the challenges we face.
To not shy away from the complexity, but to really grapple with it.
Exactly. And to remember that while these trends might feel overwhelming, they also present an opportunity for change, for creating a more just and equitable world.
So it's not just about doom and gloom, but about recognizing the potential for positive transformation. It's about being engaged, being informed, and being willing to challenge the status quo.
That's a great way to put it. And on that note, perhaps it's time to shift gears and explore some of the specific policy proposals that the BSW is putting forward and how those might address the concerns we've been discussing.
Yeah. Let's get into the nitty-gritty. What exactly are they proposing, and how would it work in practice? All right, so let's get into some of those specifics. What are some of the key policy proposals that the BSW is putting forward, and how do they connect to those anxieties and concerns we've been talking about?
Well, one of their flagship proposals is a significant expansion of the welfare state. They want to increase pensions, bolster spending on elderly care, and introduce a wealth tax on assets above 2 million euros to fund these programs. This directly addresses those economic anxieties of people who are feeling left behind, particularly older generations who might be struggling with rising costs of living.
So it's that classic social democratic approach,
hmm
but with a modern twist in the form of that wealth tax. And how does that differentiate them from other left-leaning parties in Germany?
Well, you see a lot of left-leaning parties focus primarily on income tax increases to fund social programs. The BSW's emphasis on a wealth tax really sets them apart. It appeals to those who believe that the very wealthy should contribute a larger share to support social safety nets. It ties back to their message of economic fairness and addressing inequality.
Yeah, it's a bold proposal, that's for sure. And what about their stance on industrial policy? You mentioned earlier that they seem to favor a return to a more traditional German industrial model. What does that mean in practical terms?
Well, they want to see a revitalization of German manufacturing, a real focus on creating well-paying blue-collar jobs, and a reduction in reliance on foreign imports. This resonates with those who feel that globalization has led to a hollowing out of German industry and a loss of good-paying manufacturing jobs.
It's interesting because it seems to run counter to the prevailing trend of automation and a shift towards a more service-based economy.
It does. But the BSW argues that Germany can't afford to abandon its industrial base. They say it's essential for economic stability and for national security.
So it's about more than just economics. It's about national pride, self-sufficiency, a sense of control over their own destiny.
Precisely, and this ties into their skepticism of the EU. They believe that Germany should have more control over its own economic policies, and that the EU has become too bureaucratic and too focused on the interests of big business.
So it seems like they're walking a tightrope here. They want the benefits of being part of the European Union, but they also want to assert their national sovereignty.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance, and it remains to be seen how they would actually navigate that tension if they were to gain power.
And speaking of controversial positions, let's talk about their stance on the war in Ukraine. Their opposition to sending weapons to Ukraine puts them in a very small minority, even among left-leaning parties. Why are they taking this stand?
Well, they argue that sending weapons only prolongs the conflict and increases the risk of escalation. They believe that the focus should be on diplomacy and negotiations to try to reach a peaceful settlement.
So they're essentially advocating for a pacifist approach, which is quite a radical stance given the current geopolitical climate.
It is, and it's a position that aligns with their broader skepticism of NATO and their desire for Germany to pursue a more independent foreign policy.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored the BSW's platform, their appeal to voters who feel left behind and disillusioned with the status quo, and their potential impact on German and European politics. What are your final thoughts? What should we be watching for as this story continues to unfold?
Well, I think the key question is whether the BSW can sustain its momentum. Can they translate their current popularity into actual political power? And if they do, can they govern effectively and deliver on their promises?
It's a big if,
hmm
and it's going to be fascinating to watch how it all plays out.
Absolutely. The BSW's rise is a reminder that the political landscape is in flux, that old certainties are breaking down, and that new forces are emerging to challenge the established order.
It's a time of uncertainty, but also a time of possibility. And it's a reminder that we all have a role to play in shaping the future we want to see. Whether it's staying informed, engaging in constructive dialogue, or supporting movements and organizations that align with our values, it's more important than ever to be active and engaged citizens.
I couldn't agree more. The future is not predetermined. It's something we create together.
And on that note, we'd like to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of German politics. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking. If you'd like to explore more deep dives on a range of fascinating topics, make sure to like and subscribe to our podcast. We'll keep bringing you insightful conversations that help you understand the world around us and your place within it.
Thanks for listening. Until next time, stay curious.